JLF's Brave New World welcomes you back to our second session for the day. Those of you who missed our earlier session, Looking for the Rainbow, Ruskin Bond in conversation with Namita Gokhale, or yesterday's episodes with Alif Shafaq and Elizabeth Gilbert, and all the other sessions featuring a stellar list of speakers, you can catch them on our Facebook page, JLF LitFest, or on our YouTube channel, Jaipur LitFest JLF. Our official radio partner is Red FM, Bajate Raho. Our next session is Poor Economics, the Human Toll, Abhijit V. Bannerjee and Esther Duflo in conversation. Abhijit V. Bannerjee and Esther Duflo were awarded the 2019 Nobel Prize for their work on poverty alleviation. They speak of the human toll of the pandemic in the world economy and the global south, and discuss measures and strategies to fight back the catastrophe, including the concept of a universal ultra-basic income. This session is being presented in partnership with the York University and its Festival of Ideas. Abhijit V. Bannerjee is the Ford Foundation International Professor of Economics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Esther Duflo is the Abdul Latif Jamil Professor of Poverty Alleviation and Development Economics in the Department of Economics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. They've both received numerous academic honors and awards and are both co-recipients of the 2019 Swertius Riksbank Prize in Economic Sciences in memory of Alfred Nobel for their groundbreaking work in development economic research with co-laureate Michael Kremer. Please do remember to comment and ask questions by typing it in the comment section, and we will pose these to the laureates at the end of the session. In case any of you drop off due to bandwidth issues, you can find us on our YouTube channel, Jaipur LitFest, or stay online on Facebook. And in case we drop off, just hang in there and we'll be back. Ladies and gentlemen, Poor Economics, the Human Toll, Abhijit V. Bannerjee and Esther Duflo.
Hello. Well, thank you for having us at this amazing event. I looked at the list of previous speakers. It's slightly intimidating, actually. But without further ado, let me ask, a small question. Is this the end of the world as we know it?
No, I don't think so. I think it's something easy to believe, and we have a tendency to project from the situation we are in, which is vastly different from what we knew even a few weeks or months ago. We can't go out. The world GDP has fallen to the dumps. People are getting poorer everywhere, and it's easy to think, well, no, nothing is going to ever be the same. But I think history shows that the human race is amazingly resilient. And sort of manages to extract itself out of those disasters, starting from, say, the bubonic plague, which killed millions of people in the 1600s, and continuing with the 1918-1919 flu epidemics and wars, and somehow find its way not so much different from what it was before. And I think there is a chance that it is going to happen again.
And do you think that that's necessarily a good thing? Do you think that that's what we want? Was the world that we had 3 months ago in good shape?
No, I don't think it's. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. I suppose it depends what the alternative would have been. It's just a thing. I think we are less attuned to the possibility of maximum changes. Now, maybe we can discuss that in the course of this session. There have been other big events, like, for example, the World War, the Second World War, which has led to a dramatic rethinking of society, which had big dysfunctioning that were in part responsible for the war itself, and led to massive changes in the world, many for the good, like independence of former colonies, including India, of course. So maybe there would be a rethinking of some of the big challenges we are facing. But I don't know. I'm extremely bad at forecasting, but I also feel that there might be a desire to go back to what's familiar and what it is that we had.
And you think that that's going to, so for example, the question that you started with, which is, the economy will bounce back. Will people bounce back? Would poverty have gone up permanently, you think? Or
another thing we don't know, but again, I think there are reasons to see it both ways, to see the glass full or the glass half empty. On the side of the glass full, again, going back to other catastrophes that were coming from outside, like this one, like for example, the wars. What we've seen in Japan, in Germany, in Vietnam, after their respective wars, is that even places that were completely leveled by bombing emerged quite quickly back from the ashes. So it looks like when after the crisis, the big part of the crisis is over, people are kind of eager to go back to the places and the people who had kind of dynamism and energy, and people move back and industries come and transportation comes and everything kind of goes back to where it was before. On the empty glass, we know in a lot of our work, in fact, in poor economics was kind of the basic tenet of poor economics was that one of the central defining feature of the lives of the very poor in the world is the risk of poverty traps. So what's a poverty trap is when you become poor enough that subsistence, broadly defined, becomes difficult on the type of earnings and income that you can make, then you can never really easily get out of poverty. And the worry here is that for many people, this is going to be, this could be putting them back, dragging them back into the poverty trap out of which they had slowly and painfully climbed up. So if you allow me, I'll turn the table to you and ask you a question, which is, first of all, do you agree with that diagnosis? And second of all, do you then think that whether or not people can not fall in the poverty trap or escape them has something to do with government policies in the current setting?
so I think that the question of the poverty trap is really interesting because at one level, I think that most of the people's earnings that were wiped out were primarily urban or migrant earnings. That's, the government is, at least in India, the government has been relatively proactive in both, giving money to the people who have land, the kisans, and also in terms of getting, the agricultural markets were started first, and that was the focus, and the rabi crop seems to be getting harvested. So it's not that. So I would say that the people who really hit are the families who had migrants elsewhere, and probably people who had just who were really at the margin of survival. And for both of those, I think the interesting question is, what is it that how would they react when the economy recovers? And one could take an optimistic view, which is that these people, the jobs will be, you already hear that. You already hear the industry worrying about employees and, where will the labor come from and how will construction recover? And so there will be an attempt at least to get people back. And I suspect that it will even be a proactive attempt. People will send people to recruit people. And so if you think that migration was, at least in India, a very big part of the transmission of urban growth to rural welfare, then I think those channels, there'll be an attempt to reestablish them. I think one of the things that is interesting to think about is whether this has frightened people so much that they will actually refuse to go. If they just say, look, this was the worst thing that ever happened to me, I'm not going. And I fear some people will do that. I think people have a tendency, especially as you said at the beginning, to project the current state. And the current experience was so devastating that I think it's going to take some time for their confidence to recover, to say that. And in particular, it's not clear to me that we have put in place mechanisms to make it credible for the confidence to recover, in the sense that it's quite likely that there'll be another shutdown. If you look at India, still the numbers are going up, 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 up. They're not going up incredibly fast. I think relative to what, there were these extremely dire model-based predictions. We have not gone anywhere close to that. 800,000 deaths. We've had more like 8,000 right now.
Thankfully.
So it's thankfully, I'm delighted, but I feel that there is a sense in which we haven't quite understood what's going to happen. But my sense is that it's still going to be the case that there'll be no vaccine by the fall, and if there's no vaccine, then probably the disease will come back. And if it comes back, there might be more lockdowns. And I feel that this is a moment where we need to think about reassuring people that the next lockdown will be much better. And that's going to be key for the recovery. The recovery, I think the next lockdown is not going to be like this one. It's not going to be, today you're told you are locked down, all jobs are gone. We don't have a mechanism. Since you are not a local resident, we have no mechanism for, giving you welfare. And so, tough. I mean, this is, this I think was, in fact, there's a very recent, I saw a study from yesterday of the poor migrants in Delhi, and the income loss is massive. They don't actually they're not yet mostly starving. I don't actually understand why, but Delhi's government was relatively proactive at the beginning to provide welfare. Food was provided. I think about 40% of them got something extra, etc. So there was some attempt. Maybe that's the reason. I don't know exactly what made it, but clearly, what's important is that they sort of it was a catastrophe from their point of view. They felt completely battered by the whole thing, and that, I think, to undo that memory, we need to be thinking of schemes that will kind of at least reassure them that this won't happen again. So, for example, the government has talked about one nation, one ration card. I think it's a great idea. Do it, but now, like not in 3 months, not in 3 years, not in even in 1 year. I think it has to be done now. And likewise, the idea of the universal ultra basic income that we talk about in our book, I think that's, if you do it, you have to do it now. And I think it's doable, but it strikes me as being really, really, really urgent. So to continue that, again, what do you think, if you had to pick some policies that the government should do now, what would you pick? Other than maybe food, which we agree on, probably.
So I think it's not going to be all that surprising to people that I would agree with you that the universal ultra basic income is definitely where I would go. In fact, not just for India, because the phenomenon you are describing is not India specific. We are finding exactly the same type of problems in many neighboring countries and in countries that are further away, like many countries in Africa, where I think there is not a full appreciation of the extent to which the urban migrants are not just urban migrants themselves, but are also the survival mechanism for an entire extended family in developing countries. And therefore, getting their sustenance is essential. And of course, one could understand why they would be worried. Not only that there would be another lockdown, but the reality of their life conditions in the cities is such that should there be another epidemic, even in the absence of a lockdown, they would rightly be extremely worried to go. If you don't have, like many migrants, they don't have a place to be. They don't have they live cheek to jowl on their workplaces. Any shock to the health condition is, could literally spell their death. It hasn't happened this time around, but I think to some extent it's luck. And until such time as we have a vaccine, in addition to the universal ultra basic income, one has to think about the condition of lives of migrants on the construction sites in particular, and also in various other places of work. And that's more difficult. So if I were in charge, I would start with the universal ultra basic income, which is easy. That is the part which is a little bit infuriating, that it hasn't happened in more countries and faster, because in many cases, the pipes are there. We know how to do it. In India, they are so close to be there with the JAM trilogy, where a lot of people have a bank account. There isn't more or less functional system to wire monies to bank account, to access it through phone, etc., etc. This could have been accelerated. This can still be accelerated, and then money can be pushed. And I think one thing that stops that to happen is not the technology, but it's the hangover of many people who think that the one thing we need to be careful about with social system is to not give it to the undeserving poor. And I think it has been, not just in India, but everywhere, a very difficult adjustment to think, well, we have to think the other way. And right now, the objective is to reach as many people who are hard to reach as possible. Those are the old people who have no phone and no connection in villages. Those are the migrant workers who have no legitimate address anywhere, and so on and so forth. Then when that is done, the second urgent thing, I think, is to think of life conditions. Already before COVID, they were unacceptable. In a world of COVID, they are unsustainable.
I mean, just to pursue that. But how would you go about organizing? What does universal exactly mean in a context where, the old people are unconnected to the system? If they don't even, I think we collected some data, as you know, in Tamil Nadu, and they were saying the older people seem to know there is a lockdown, but they don't know why, and they don't know exactly what they're supposed to do about it. They seem to have extremely little information. In that world, how do you make sure that the universal part of that is achieved? What are the, I mean, you said that it's close, but what are the steps that need to be taken? If you were today, you were asked, what?
I think it's a difficult issue to reach the hard to reach, but it's not. But it's not an impossible issue if you set your mind to it. And so to take the older people, for example, almost everyone will know someone who knows an old person at the minimum. And I think there are fewer links than that. Probably even the most isolated of old people are a link away from being connected. And then once we have that, then there is a possibility of reaching them and making sure that they receive either cash or they are given a phone and then can get the money on their phone, or whatever solution is being found. But this is so much not in the spirit of the way that social protection has functioned, where in general we are trying to put little or big hoops for people to jump, as opposed to here trying to clear the existing hoops. So that's kind of, I think, again, it's more an issue of mindset. And once we have the mindset, we can get it done.
Okay. So, and if I now continuing that thought, and what do you mean by ultra basic? So universal ultra basic income. What what would be an adequate intervention at this point, you think? What's the, is it, what are we trying to achieve? Are we trying to achieve money now, money in the future, assurance? I mean, all of these things. What do you have in mind in terms of if you say that this is what we should do? What is that this?
I think ultra basic is to contrast it with basic, which is something that has been proposed worldwide and in many rich countries in particular, where the idea is really something that people could live on in a complete way, in a sense. And this would be a ton of money, budgets that would be very difficult to obtain, even in rich countries, let alone in poor countries. With ultra basic, I think what we need to target is survival, and survival now and forever. So ideally, we wouldn't just have the ultra basic today and then it would go away once the COVID crisis is gone. We would have the promise of ultra basic always there for you when you need it. So in the current crisis, what would be different is that you would really reach out to people and say, hey, there is this ultra basic income. And then when things are becoming a little bit better and when people are used to it, you could kind of ask them, this is what we are proposing in the book, we could ask them to kind of claim it so that people would only come and claim it when they need it. But what this would give is people, it would give people reassurance that no matter how bad things come, survival is a cell phone away, they have the possibility to do it. So in terms of levels, I think I'm going to turn the table and ask you the question. And then I want to ask you the last question since you asked me the first. But let's first, maybe you can say a few words about the type of budget that this would, per person, what is, because I know you've been working on the calculations and so you have more expertise than me.
I think that 1,000 rupees per person per month would make a huge difference. That's probably too much. Maybe even 500 rupees. So it's like for a family of 2,500 rupees. That's I think that makes a big difference. It will pay for all the emergency things essentially, other than if you need healthcare, expensive healthcare. But I think at this point, all of this, all of the at least COVID-related healthcare should be made free. There should be no charges anywhere, and I think the government should fit the bill if necessary in private hospitals. But we shouldn't be trying to design a new system for it. We should be just making it free and then paying for it if needed. But I think COVID-related should be treated. Since we are already trying to identify the cases, we should be in a good place to then say that, look, anybody who that case has been identified, we now provide him with healthcare. We don't have to worry about people abusing the system so much. So I think that there I would say, so even 2,000 rupees for a family every month, I think would make a big difference. Would provide an assurance that it's not as bad as it has been.
And do you think India can afford it, for example?
Yeah. At least for the next 6 months, they can afford it. I think India is going to actually face a massive demand shortfall. So I think pumping money into the hands of people might actually be the way to save the economy.
Since we only have about 5 minutes left, I wanted to ask you a small question, since you started with a small question. You basically asked me if this is...
I'm bracing.
You basically asked me whether this is the end of the world. Let me ask you whether this is the beginning of a new and better world, potentially.
I feel that the answer could be yes. That could be, this is what as you said, the Second World War did. The Second World War taught us that, the nature of the combative nature of international relations was extraordinarily costly. It really led to almost a destruction of everything we cared about. And so I think that it was that's sort of where the United Nations, the World Bank, the IMF, all of these come out of these, the whole Bretton Woods system come out of the war. The Marshall Plan comes out of the war. The European community comes out of the war. Everything in the West, we know that it's completely institutionally, the international community is entirely designed by the war. And I think that's a good example to keep in mind, that was a consequence. And I think in this particular case, I think we understood, I think if we haven't understood that, it's telling us that nature can be incredibly more powerful than us, that we just have no control over what nature does. I think if we understand that, and we understand that that in the crisis that nature creates, we are really completely powerless alone. I think those two are the key lessons, that nature is incredibly powerful, and that with the climate change, we are just asking for it at this point. And with the destruction of the environment, of the kind of the ecosystems, where, I think that many of these, the fact that MERS, SARS, etc. are coming up, this is, I suspect, something to do with destruction of ecosystems in particular areas. All of that seems to me to be extraordinarily frightening. And in that world, we need to be able to cooperate. We need to be able to, for example, when the vaccine becomes available, how do we get the vaccine distributed? Who pays for it? Who produces it? India, for example, is a great place to produce vaccines, but somebody will have to pay for it. And who pays for it? How does that get arranged? How does that process, the property rights, the intellectual property battles that would happen, all of that needs to be sorted out. There will be a good training for nations to work together, because in many ways, I think the vaccine has been a great success of our times. In a sense, I would say with Gavi and with PEPFAR and all of these things, we have, not vaccines, but medicine in general is a place where we have actually made progress. We've sort of, vaccination rates are up hugely, and HIV is no longer as big a killer as it used to be. And all of those things have happened as a result of international cooperation. So we have a model there. That's a model to be expanded to thinking about everything else. I think climate change is the one that's sort of sitting in everybody's head and in everybody's drawing room. And it might teach us that we need to just be more willing to work with each other, give up our own interests. And in some ways, I think it might be a great opportunity for young people to be excited that, that we don't have to, that we have the job of saving the world now. And that's an exciting job in some ways. I think if you were young and if I was young now, and I would be, in a sense, I would be excited. I would be, this is now, I don't have to feel obligated to, whatever, make as much money as I can in finance or something, but I can just say that, look, we need to save the world. I think that's crucial. And that's a big gift, in a sense, that we could give the world. Let's embrace that.
Professor Bannerjee, Professor Duflo, we need to save the world. That was just incredible. I'm going to start, there's millions of questions streaming in, but I'm going to take off from what you both said, that free healthcare, perhaps in India, rupees 2,000 per family per month, at least in the next few months. But coming to the vaccine, you've talked about making it accessible. We know, for example, with the polio vaccine, professors, that it took 4 decades of very determined work and lots of resources, the Rotary, etc., really taking it out to that last mile, and it's the last mile. But with this particular vaccine, it's not enough for just India or America to be vaccinated or to be, come to herd immunity. It has to be the whole world. And you talked about the need for the world to work together. And yet we have this dichotomy, even as we speak, where some of the world institutions, WHO and the UN, and we don't have a principal anymore in the room. Unfortunately, the principal at some point, which used to be America and before that the UK, seems to have stepped down. And given that, how do you see this new world order? I mean, there is a jostling, obviously, of new powers. but neither necessarily have the fate of the entire world as their primary concern. They have their own economies or their own needs or global or geopolitical needs at their concern. So how do you both see that being fashioned, even as you say that perhaps the future belongs to young people, but how do the young people get their words and voices to be heard?
So I'll start and maybe Esther continues. I mean, I do feel that I have two thoughts on that which are maybe moderately optimistic. One is I feel that the actually, given that the US and China are battling it out, it's Europe's moment. Europe should just step up to the plate and realize that it could have world leadership. It is already, in some ways, the world leader in climate change. It has been for a while. This is a moment for Europe to step up and say, look, we really have the right. Somehow our political traditions have absorbed these ideas of what are about what's critical much better than the other institutions, other countries, and we are kind of ready for it. And I feel that Europe should be stepping up to the plate. I also think that in a sense in India we have a very ambivalent relationship. We talk, and even the government talks a lot about positively about climate change, and yet we do very little about it. We could step up a lot more. We could with Europe, we could be in a much more of a leadership position. I don't see why not. I think we have a domestic crisis, environmental crisis of a massive scale. You suddenly see everybody remembering that you used to be able to see the mountains from the plains and all those things. And those memories are good to harvest, to remind people that, this is, we paid enormous cost to save some lives. Why not pay a much smaller cost to save many more lives? I mean, in a sense, I feel like the message here is, there's so many lives that are being every day. Our traffic deaths, our mortality rate has gone down as a result of COVID, because I think our traffic deaths so trump everything.
27%, 10% for murders and 17% for traffic accidents. Yeah.
But I think we'll have bigger effects. We haven't seen the environmental effects. Those are also going to show up. Less people will die from, cardiopulmonary distress of different kinds because the air is cleaner. I absolutely think that we should, if we are willing to spend, lose, some 30-40% of GDP in the very short run, but still very large amount of money for COVID, why not 1%, 2%, 3% for just saving the country from the kind of environment we have?
Professor Duflo, let me add another question before you take on from Professor Bannerjee. Joan Concord-Cannon from the York Festival of Ideas have said, are you concerned about the impact of the pandemic in stopping brilliant students from developing countries being able to gain access to education in other countries? And what additional global measures do we need to introduce to enable students to gain access to university education? And just to add to that, I mean, one of the reasons why we set about doing JLF Brave New World is, as you know, we passionately believe that even as cities are locking down on themselves, we need to keep it open, the free flow of ideas, both science and the arts, and allow that to go across the world. But love to hear your point on that.
Well, I think, again, it could go both ways, but here I'm actually reasonably optimistic that in the short to medium run, like within, say, 5 years after we, let's say, hopefully have a vaccine, this is actually going to be a good thing for ideas to travel more effectively to everyone around the world. And the reason is that in this pandemic, we are discovering the possibility to do these kind of things that we are doing today. And we are discovering that, okay, it's not nearly as nice compared to sitting in Jaipur and having a great time there. But we can also reach many, many, many people who would have never had the opportunity to actually go to Jaipur. Similarly, when we teach, we now can teach, potentially we can teach a class that is going to reach many, many more people who would otherwise not have been able to do it. And we, even before COVID, we had been engaged in a small version of that, which is we've run a master's program, half of which is done online, and the other half of it for 20 students who got selected is done at MIT. And the online version, of course, has many, many, many more students, thousands of students around the world. And 20 of those came to MIT, and the poor things, after a few weeks, got sent back home. But we had a chance to see them for a few weeks, and they just completed the year. And they took classes with the MIT students. And we just are looking at the grades. And it's unbelievable how much better they are than the MIT students who they take classes where. They are at the absolute top of the class, all of them, which means that there are just many, many, many people around the world who otherwise would have had never the chance to come anywhere close to MIT, who are so qualified to listen to the classes, to benefit from them, etc. And so I think that renews our enthusiasm to try to do more, to reach those people in various ways. And I think we've learned via, being forced to teach by Zoom that it can be done. And it can be done in a way that is good enough that you can now imagine thousands of teachers having great knowledge in various topics. And by the way, they don't have to be all at MIT. They are probably sitting today in India and in Africa and are completely unreachable to everyone. And then we'll discover they have this great expertise and knowledge and wonderful pedagogical talent, and they are just going to be heard everywhere. And that hope existed before the pandemic, but was a little bit kind of lying dormant after the initial enthusiasm for massive online courses. And I think now we are rediscovering ways to do that. We are discovering the importance of the synchronous event, the fact that we are all sitting together, talking together at the same time, even if we are not in the same place, and other various ways that people have found to make this experience useful, that I think could actually turn out to be a more than a silver lining, a ferment of the new world.
Thank you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to club the questions together because there are just too many of them. On a lighter note, Sandeep asked, do you think economists should be given the post of the Prime Minister? But on a more serious note, Arunji asked, why governments, despite advanced technological predictions, are not good at predicting what's going to happen?
I don't know what advanced technology we have for prediction. I mean, the world is extremely complicated place. I feel like I don't blame governments for being able to not predict. I mean, we just think of, we've actually made remarkably fast progress against COVID. I mean, most pandemics took years. Even Ebola, which was so merciless in killing people, we really made very slow progress against it. And this is just, I mean, the fact that there are a bunch of vaccines in stage 2 trial already, that the gene was sequenced already, all of these things. I mean, in a sense, we are doing extremely fast progress. It's just, we're not used to doing anything like this, in a sense. I'm not at all blaming governments here. I think where we should blame them is more in the US particular. We could have anticipated that this would happen. And the policy, it's not the technology side where we failed. We failed. The policy was obvious. Europe had already understood it. We just sat there and let ourselves be as sitting ducks because our president happened to have fanciful beliefs. And that sadly was nothing to do with technology or knowledge. It was kind of obvious to everybody, and we let ourselves be a sitting ducks. 100,000 Americans have died now, and more will.
In fact, one of the sessions that we're looking at doing with Professor Homi Bhabha is about unpreparedness, and how is it that despite, there's always a crisis, and you both spoke about the Spanish flu and Ebola, etc. And yet, once again, when there's a pandemic, we still seem to be unprepared. Going forward, so Charlie McLaughlin asks, will the massive debt levels taken on by the large Western economies during this crisis set back the fight against poverty? Aditi asks, what factor do you think is most prominent in nature for the rich-poor class divide issue? And Sabrina Zisler asks, how do you foresee this crisis affecting income inequality? So roughly all three in the same way. Professor?
Already at the very beginning of the pandemic, people talked about the great leveler because the virus doesn't care who you are, etc. And we very quickly discovered that it's just not true. That both the health consequences, the health impact, and the economic impact are very unequally shared. So in the US, the mortality rate is so much higher among African American and Hispanic community that it is just shameful. So inside society, this has actually completely exploded the inequalities that already were there. And then if we're thinking about the medium run, until a vaccine can be found, or even after there is a vaccine and we are just worried about the next pandemic, there is going to be adjustment needed for how people produce and consume, etc. And the big question that will be in front of us is, who is going to pay the cost of these adjustments? So for example, take meatpacking plants. Meatpacking plants have been huge clusters of infection, both in the US and in Europe, because people work in so close proximity and they are not at all protected. And moving forward, either we could move to be vegetarian, or in the meat packing plant, there could be adjustments with like fewer people and more separations, etc. But that's going to cost money. And the question is, the money, does it come from the profit or does it come from wage pressure on the lower worker? And my opinion is that there is no iron law of economics that say it has to come from the workers, that it's going to be a political choices about how this is divided and who is, whether the cost to do this is going to come in slightly lower profit that is going to reduce inequality, or lower wages that is going to increase inequality. So again, that's like, it's not going to be an economist's choice, it's going to be a society's choice. And what's going to happen both to worldwide inequality and to within nation inequality is also going to be a function of how we decide to respond to the challenge.
Weirdly Wired asks, what of the people stuck in between the poorest and the richest? The middle class is the one who's struggling the most. And Pranjali asks, what do you think of how the MSME sector of India will be able to respond to the crisis after this?
And those are related. I'm not sure that's true. I think the migrants are the ones who suffered the most. I don't think it's true that the middle class have suffered the most. I think the middle class has a reason to be very frightened, and that, if the economy really collapses, their middle classness they'll lose, so they're frightened about it. But as such, they are still able to, they usually don't live in the place where they can get PDS, and if 75% coverage in the PDS now. So I don't feel that that proposition as an empirical claim is true. I think what is true is that the middle class and the MSMEs are sort of, they understand that right now they have no idea what the future looks like. And I think it depends very much, I go back to something I said, on the macro policies that the government takes. That I think we need to be very conscious of reviving the economy. The government has actually been quite in India has been particularly generous in a sense to the MSME sector, to the extent that these people can borrow. The question is whether or not the banking sector will cooperate. My sense is that the banking sector has often, managed to dodge these things. So you don't want to lend to poor people. You don't do it. I mean, you can, the fact that there are loans available. So I think the part that's maybe about you being able to defer or cancel payments, maybe that still helps people. I feel that but if there's nothing to sell because people don't have money to buy, then all of this monetary policy is really sort of beside the point. So I really think that we need to think of how to get money in the hands of people so that they will be willing to buy. Then the MSME sector can sell.
If I can
Ranjan,
add,
sorry, go ahead, Professor.
Just if I can add, not even add, but just summarize, I think the middle class should feel very, their plight is very dependent on how the poor are doing. They shouldn't see this as a fight between them and the poor, because the biggest effect on the middle class and the MSME sector, which is related, is the rebound effect from the crisis, not the crisis itself. So if the rebound effect can be stopped by making sure that the poor have enough to eat and to buy things from them, they'll be fine. So I think they should really see this as not, oh, any dollar that is going to the migrants or any rupee that is going to the migrant is not coming to me. That would be a mistake.
I don't think India is seeing it like that. I think what India's middle class is doing is actually discovering that there was this invisible class and how much this invisible class ensured that the wheels of a state continued, whether it was building their homes to serving in their homes and all the services. And with the exodus of the class from the cities, I think the impact on the kirana or the smaller shops in a city where they went for their coconut oil or their 1 kilo of lentils and rice, that impact is huge. And the next question is actually in that. Ranjan Burman asks, how could economic balance possible in our country when some people earn thoughtlessly in this pandemic time, and we, the poor people, compelled to recharge our data balance without any rebate? Wesh Alors asks, if one implements an universal ultra basic income, how solvable would this be and who would pay the bill? And I'm going to give you one more. Ritu asks, from economic point, how long do you think corporate India will survive in lockdown?
Those are complicated questions. I'll answer a bit of it, which is that I think that the part about paying for universal ultra basic income is the part that I have been saying I don't worry too much about. I think like the US, like Japan, like Europe, monetizing part of the government debt, meaning basically printing money and giving it to people, is a good thing to do in a massive demand for shortfall setting. So what I think we may want to do is, in fact, say, look, we're going to give you money, but not necessarily now, because in a sense, right now, there's still, the production side is a bit frozen. But as the production side starts to relax, which is happening in many parts of India, we want to put money matching that in the hands of consumers. And I think that's going to generate GST collection. It's going to just create a re-enliven the economy. I think that's critical. So I don't think that where will the money come from is a well-posed question. The money, right now, the question is where will the demand come from, not where the money will come from. Money is just a way to make people exchange. It's a means of facilitation. I think if we have the exchange, then the economy will recover, and that's what we need to think about.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to wrap up, but there is a last question because it's an emotional question from Siddharth Setia from Calcutta. He says, Sir, Pranam, what advice do you have for Mamata Bannerjee, Chief Minister of West Bengal, as we citizens of Kolkata are in dark about the actual COVID-19 cases in Kolkata? and lockdown is coming to an end this month. And of course, given the cyclone, the effect of the cyclone, now married to what's already there, how would you advise her?
I think I would advise the citizens to give her a little, cut her a little slack. I think she's maybe she's not doing everything right, but I think right now my view, and I've taken this view vis-a-vis the Prime Minister Modi as well, that I really think that they are under extreme pressure. They might have to take, they may not be taking all the right decisions, but I think the idea that they have an easy time is, and they're just doing crazy things for no reason is, I mean, they feel political pressure, they feel competitive political pressures from all sides, and they feel that they don't understand the world, and they're right that they don't understand the world, so they're trying. I think that cut people some slack. It takes a while. I look in the US, after a cyclone, a week to restore power is not unusual in the US. I mean, if you think of what happened in Louisiana, it took them months to restore anything.
Or Houston after the last big.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we should cut her some slack. Say that try to assume that she's trying to do her best right now, and then I think we can go back to being judgmental later. I think right now my sense is that she's in an extremely difficult place. I tend to take the view that we should be generous at these times.
Professor Bannerjee, Professor Duflo, we could really have continued this forever. I mean, the questions just continue to stream through, and if you all don't mind, perhaps we'll send some of these to you, and if you'd like to answer them, we'll post them back. But thank you so very much for being here with us at JLF Brave New World. And thank you all for watching, Tilomtama and Mr. Parikh, etc. I'm sorry we couldn't take those questions and pose it to them, including Lawrence's. We thank our official radio partner, Red FM Bajate Raho, and our special partner today, the University of York's Festival of Ideas. Please do remember to log in next week on Wednesday, Saturday, and Sunday to continue watching our fabulous sessions from JLF's Brave New World. On Wednesday, the 27th of May, we have Silence in the Age of Noise, Erling Kage in conversation with Osnesir Stad, followed by Dara Shikho, Supriya Gandhi, in conversation with Ira Mukhoti. Now, as always, we have a special sequence from the Jaipur Music Stage archives featuring Papon. Angarag Mahanta, known by his stage name Papon, is from Assam. Papon is a singer-songwriter and music director for Indian films. He's also the lead singer and founder of the folk fusion band Papon and the East India Company. Enjoy the evening, enjoy the rest of the week, and see you back on Wednesday.